I'm Marcus Thompson, 34, and for 3 years I've been raising my twin daughters alone. After my wife walked out, my older brother Jake always called single fatherhood impossible, laughing at my struggles while flaunting his picture-perfect family and six-figure salary. He'd roll his eyes whenever I mentioned sleepless nights or homework battles, dismissing my challenges as excuses for poor planning. But last Tuesday, everything changed. Jake's wife left him with their 2 young sons, and suddenly the man who had all the answers was calling me at midnight, voice breaking, asking how I managed to keep going when everything felt hopeless. What happened next would transform not just our relationship, but everything I thought I knew about family, strength, and the brother who'd spent years making me feel like a failure. If you've ever felt judged by family who didn't understand your struggles, this story is for you. The custody agreement papers still sit in my kitchen drawer, yellowed at the edges now. 3 years ago, when Sarah signed them and walked out of our lives, I thought they represented failure. Looking back, they were actually the beginning of everything I'd become. It was a Thursday when she left. The twins were 6 then, still small enough to need help with everything but old enough to understand that mommy wasn't coming back. Emma cried for 3 days straight. Lily went completely silent, which somehow felt worse. I remember calling Jake that first weekend, desperate and drowning. The girls had been fighting all morning, the house was a disaster, and I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in days. I needed help, or at least someone to tell me I wasn't completely screwing up their lives. "Look, Marcus," Jake said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of barely contained impatience. "Kids need structure. They need discipline. If you can't handle basic parenting responsibilities, maybe you should consider what's actually best for them." The words hit like a physical blow. What's best for them? As if I hadn't been wrestling with that question every single day since Sarah left. As if I hadn't been trying to figure out how to be both mother and father to 2 heartbroken little girls. "I'm not saying give up," he continued, probably hearing my silence. "But maybe it's time to be realistic about your capabilities. Rebecca and I have been talking, and we think I hung up on him. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my big brother." The twins were watching me from the living room, their faces serious and worried. That's when I realized they didn't need me to be perfect. They needed me to be present. That night, I made a decision. No more asking Jake for help. No more hoping for understanding from someone who clearly thought I was in over my head. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it my way. The custody papers in my drawer weren't a symbol of failure anymore. They were proof that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. The family Christmas photo from last year still haunts me. There's Jake in the center, arm around Rebecca, both boys perfectly dressed and smiling. They look like they stepped out of a magazine ad for successful living. I'm off to the side with Emma and Lily, who are slightly wrinkled, and Emma has chocolate on her face despite my best efforts. That photo captured everything about our family dynamic. Jake had always been the golden child, the one who did everything right. Harvard MBA at 28, corner office by 30, beautiful wife who looked like she belonged in the society pages. Their house in Westchester was pristine, their children well-behaved, their marriage, apparently perfect. Growing up, I was the creative one, family code for the one who couldn't be counted on for serious things. While Jake was captain of the debate team and student council president, I was in art class or working on the school newspaper. When Jake got into Harvard, I went to state school on an art scholarship. When Jake landed his first 6-figure job, I was teaching high school art and barely making rent. For years, I told myself I was happy with my choices. I loved teaching, loved seeing kids discover their creativity. I married Sarah, who was beautiful and free-spirited, and we had the twins. Life felt full, even if it wasn't financially secure. But Jake's success cast a long shadow. At family gatherings, conversations always seemed to revolve around his latest promotion, his new car, his kids' academic achievements. When people asked about my life, there was always a subtle undertone of pity, as if they were asking about someone with a chronic illness. "Marcus is doing great," Mom would say with forced brightness. "He's so good with the children and his art. Well, you know how creative he is." Creative. The word that meant well-meaning but ultimately unsuccessful. The word that meant, "we're proud of you, but we wish you were more like your brother." Jake never said anything directly, but his attitude was clear. He'd offered to help with bills, always phrased as investments in the girls' future. He'd make suggestions about my career, about how I could leverage my skills in more profitable ways. He meant well, I think, but every gesture reinforced the same message. I wasn't quite measuring up. The worst part was how much I wanted his approval. Even as an adult, even as a father myself, I still craved that moment when Jake would look at me with genuine respect instead of benevolent concern. I never imagined that moment would come when he needed me most. The hand-drawn chore chart still hangs on our refrigerator, though it's been revised about 50 times. In those first months after Sarah left, that chart was my lifeline, a colorful, crayon-decorated roadmap to survival that the girls and I created together. Those early days were brutal. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m., get the girls ready for school, drop them off, teach a full day of classes, pick them up, help with homework, make dinner, oversee baths, read bedtime stories, and collapse into bed, only to do it all again the next day. Weekends were spent catching up on laundry, grocery shopping, and trying to clean a house that seemed to generate chaos faster than I could contain it. The girls were struggling to. Emma, always the more expressive twin, would have meltdowns over everything: the wrong color cup, a broken crayon, the fact that I couldn't braid her hair the way Mommy did. Lily withdrew into herself, speaking in whispers and clinging to a stuffed elephant that she carried everywhere. I made so many mistakes those first few months. I burned dinner more times than I can count. I forgot picture day, school forms, and permission slips. I showed up to pick up the girls wearing paint-stained shirts and mismatched socks. Other parents would give me those looks, part pity, part judgment, as if I was a walking advertisement for why single fathers shouldn't exist. But slowly, we figured it out. The chore chart was Emma's idea. Actually, she suggested we make it pretty so it wouldn't feel like punishment. We used different colors for different tasks, and I let them decorate it with stickers and drawings. Suddenly, brushing teeth became a quest to earn a gold star, and making beds turned into a race to see who could do it fastest. I learned to cook simple meals that the girls actually enjoyed. Spaghetti became our signature dish, with Emma helping measure ingredients and Lily setting the table. We established routines that felt like rituals rather than chores. Sunday morning pancakes, Wednesday movie nights, Friday afternoon ice cream after school. The breakthrough came about 4 months. I was helping with homework when Lily looked up at me with those serious gray eyes and said, "Daddy, are you sad that you have to take care of us?" The question broke my heart, but also opened it. I realized that in all my scrambling to be competent, I'd forgotten to show them how much I loved being their dad. That night, I sat both girls down and told them the truth, that yes, sometimes I was tired, and yes, sometimes I made mistakes, but taking care of them wasn't a burden. It was the best part of my day. Emma crawled into my lap and hugged me tight. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. "Me too," Lily added, leaning against my shoulder. That was the moment I realized we were going to be okay. Not perfect, but okay. And sometimes okay is enough. I still have the text messages saved on my phone, not because I enjoy reading them, but because sometimes I need to remind myself that the doubt in my head isn't always my own voice. Saw Emma's teacher at the grocery store. She mentioned Emma seems tired lately. "Are you sure you're maintaining proper bedtime routines?" Jake, 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Rebecca thinks the girls might benefit from some female influence. Her sister volunteers with Big Sisters, if you're interested. Jake, 2:15 p.m. on a Saturday. Mom mentioned you missed Lily's school play rehearsal. Organization is key to successful parenting. Marcus, happy to share some time management resources. Jake, 7:23 a.m. on a Sunday. Each message felt like a small cut, never direct criticism, always wrapped in concern for the girls' well-being, always implying that I was falling short, that my best efforts weren't quite good enough. The worst part was how these messages wormed their way into my brain. I'd second-guess every decision, wonder if I was doing permanent damage to my daughters because I couldn't French braid their hair, or because I sometimes let them have cereal for dinner when we were running late. Rebecca's comments were even more subtle but somehow more devastating. At family gatherings, she'd make observations that sounded supportive but felt like indictments. "Oh, Marcus, you're doing such a good job," she'd say, watching Emma wipe her nose on her sleeve. "Single parenting is so difficult. The girls are lucky to have such a dedicated father." The pause before dedicated said everything. The way she'd smooth down her own son's perfectly styled hair while talking to me. The way she'd offer to help the girls with their appearance, as if I couldn't be trusted to notice that Lily's socks didn't match. I started dreading family events. The girls loved seeing their cousins, but I felt like I was being evaluated. Every moment, were they well behaved enough, clean enough, happy enough? Did their clothes match? Were they using proper table manners? Jake would make suggestions disguised as casual observations. "Have you considered a cleaning service? I know money's tight, but the girls need a stable environment." Or, "Rebecca found this great enrichment programmed for the boys. Might be worth looking into for Emma and Lily. I could help with the cost." Every offer of help felt like an acknowledgement of my inadequacy. Every piece of advice reinforced the message that I was stumbling through something that came naturally to others. The breaking point came at Mom's birthday dinner. Emma had spilled juice on her dress, and I was trying to clean it with a napkin when Rebecca leaned over. "You know, Marcus, there are stain removal pens specifically designed for this. I always keep one in my purse for emergencies." She meant, well, I think. But in that moment, surrounded by family members who seemed to have everything figured out, I felt like I was drowning in my own incompetence that night. Driving home with the girls asleep in the back seat, I made a decision. I was done apologizing for not being perfect. I was done accepting criticism disguised as concern. My daughters were happy, healthy, and loved. That had to be enough. Little did I know that Jake was about to discover just how much strength it takes to be enough. Emma's art project still hangs in my office at school, a construction paper masterpiece titled "My Hero Dad" with a stick figure wearing a superhero cape and a big smile. She made it for Father's Day during our second year together, and it remains one of my most treasured possessions. By then, we'd found our rhythm. What had started as pure survival had evolved into something beautiful, a family culture that was uniquely ours. We weren't following anyone else's playbook anymore. We were writing our own. Mornings became our creative time. Instead of the rushed chaos of getting ready for school, we turned it into a game. Emma would pick out both girls' outfits, creating elaborate stories about why certain colors went together. Lily would be responsible for the morning music, choosing songs that would set the tone for our day. I'd make breakfast while they got dressed, and we'd eat together, talking about our plans and dreams. Homework time transformed from a battle into an adventure. As an art teacher, I knew that kids learn differently, and I applied that knowledge at home. When Emma struggled with math, we'd use colored blocks to make the numbers visual. When Lily had trouble with reading, we'd act out the stories, complete with voices and costumes. Our house became a canvas for creativity. The girls' artwork covered every available wall space. We had a craft corner in the living room where projects were always in progress. The kitchen table was constantly covered with supplies for whatever creation was underway. But it wasn't just about the fun stuff. We were learning life skills together. Emma became my sous chef, helping plan meals and grocery lists. Lily took charge of our family calendar, carefully marking important dates and helping us stay organized. They learned to do their own laundry, to clean their rooms, to help with household chores, not because they had to, but because they were part of our team. The real transformation came when I stopped trying to be the perfect parent and started being the authentic one. When I burned dinner, we laughed about it and ordered pizza. When I made mistakes, I apologized to the girls and asked for their help in doing better. When I didn't know how to do something like style their hair for picture day, we figured it out together, watching YouTube videos and practicing until we got it right. Our bedtime routine became sacred. Instead of just reading stories, we'd create them together. Each night, one of us would start a story, and the others would add to it. We built elaborate fantasy worlds full of brave princesses and magical creatures. Sometimes the stories were silly, sometimes profound, but they were always ours. The girls' confidence bloomed. Emma, who had been shy and clingy after Sarah left, became a natural leader at school. Lily, who had retreated into silence, found her voice and became the family comedian. They weren't perfect children, they fought, they made messes, they had bad days, but they were genuinely happy. I realized I was happy too. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly competent at something that mattered. I was a good dad, not despite being a single parent, but because of everything that journey had taught me. The girls felt it too. They'd brag to their friends about our creative projects, invite them over to join our adventures, and beam with pride when their teachers complimented their artwork or their kindness to others. One evening, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "Daddy, I'm glad it's just us. Just us. You know, without Mommy, I miss her sometimes, but I like our family the way it is now." That night, I understood something profound. We hadn't just survived Sarah leaving, we had thrived. We had created something beautiful and strong, and entirely our own. The family we'd built wasn't a consolation prize or a second-best option. It was exactly what we were meant to be. If only I could have shown Jake that being enough was actually being everything. Jake's last LinkedIn post before everything fell apart was typical of him. A perfectly curated photo of his family at their country club's annual gala, with a caption about grateful for work-life balance and the support of an amazing family. Rebecca looked stunning in a designer dress, the boys were impeccably dressed, and Jake wore the confident smile of a man who had everything figured out. I remember rolling my eyes when I saw it. There was my brother, once again showcasing his perfect life while I was at home helping. Emma with a science project made from toilet paper rolls and trying to convince Lily that vegetables weren't actually poison. But looking back, I should have noticed the cracks that were already showing. The first sign was at Mom's Easter dinner. Jake arrived late, checking his phone constantly throughout the meal. When Rebecca made a comment about him missing another school event, he snapped at her in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. He quickly apologized, blaming work stress. But I caught the look that passed between them. Sharp, resentful, tired. Rebecca had changed too. The polished perfection was still there, but there was an edge to it now. She criticized the boys more harshly, micromanaged their every move, and made cutting remarks about Jake's priorities. When little Michael spilled juice on his shirt, she reacted as if he'd committed a crime. "God, Michael, be careful. Do you know how much this shirt cost? Your father thinks money grows on trees, but some of us have to think about these things." Jake said nothing, just stared at his plate. I started noticing how Jake looked tired, stressed, older than his 36 years. He'd put on weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. When I asked how he was doing, he'd deflect with questions about work or the girls, never really answering. The boys seemed different too. 7-year-old David had developed a nervous habit of biting his nails, and 4-year-old Michael was having tantrums that seemed disproportionate to typical childhood frustrations. They were quieter around their parents, more careful, as if they were walking on eggshells. During one family gathering, I watched Jake try to help David with homework while Rebecca prepared dinner. David kept making small mistakes, and each time, Jake's jaw would tighten a little more. David, we've been over this. You need to focus. How are you going to succeed in school if you can't pay attention to simple instructions? David's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He just nodded, and tried again. I wanted to say something, to tell Jake that the boy was only 7, that mistakes were part of learning, but I didn't. I was the family screw-up, remember? What did I know about raising successful children? The irony wasn't lost on me. Here the first was the one who supposedly didn't have his act together, watching my perfect brother struggle with basic patience and kindness toward his own kids. But I still didn't see the full picture. I didn't understand that Jake's marriage was held together by image management and financial security rather than love or partnership. I didn't realize that Rebecca's resentment had been building for years, that she felt trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt empty on the inside. I had no idea that Jake was about to discover what it really meant to be alone with children who needed more than he knew how to give. The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked the clock, annoyed at being woken up. Tuesday night had been like any other homework. Dinner, baths, bedtime stories, and finally a few precious hours of quiet before sleep. I almost didn't answer. Late-night calls usually meant emergencies, and I'd learned to brace myself for bad news. But when I saw Jake's name on the screen, curiosity won over caution. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, rough and broken. Jake, what's wrong? Is everyone okay? There was a long pause, and then I heard something I'd never heard before in my life. My confidence, successful, always in control, big brother crying. She's gone, he said finally. Rebecca took the boys and left. She's at her sister's place in Connecticut. She said she's not coming back. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. What happened? I don't know. I mean, I do know, but he broke off. Taking a shaky breath, we had a fight. About money, about priorities, about everything. She said she was tired of being married to someone who was never really there. She said the boys deserved better than a father who saw them as accessories to his perfect life. The words hung in the air between us. I wanted to ask more questions, to understand what had led to this moment, but something in his voice stopped. Me, Marcus, he said, and his voice cracked again. How do you do it? How do you wake up every morning and know you're responsible for everything? How do you not completely fall apart when you realize you have no idea what you're doing? I was quiet for a long moment. 3 years ago, I would have given anything to hear Jake ask for my advice, to admit that I might know something he didn't. Now, hearing the genuine desperation in his voice, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness for the pain he was experiencing. Are the boys with you now? I asked. No, they're at her sister's. Rebecca said she needed time to think, to figure out what she wants to do. But Marcus, what if she decides she wants full custody? What if she takes them away completely? I can't lose them. I know I haven't been the best father, but I love them. I just don't know how to show it the way they need. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in my chest. This was my brother, not the successful businessman or the judgmental, older sibling, but the scared father who was facing the possibility of losing his children. Jake, I said quietly, you're not going to lose them, but you need to figure out what kind of father you want to be, not what looks good on the outside, but what actually matters to them. I don't know where to start, he admitted. I've been so focused on providing for them, on making sure they had everything they needed, that I never learned how to just be with them. When Rebecca left, David asked me why Mommy was sad all the time, and I couldn't answer him. I don't even know my own children well enough to explain their mother's feelings. That's when I understood. Jake wasn't just facing the end of his marriage, he was facing the possibility of becoming the kind of father he'd always assumed he already was, the kind of father he'd been judging me for not being. Do you want me to come over? I asked. Would you? I know it's late, and you have work tomorrow, but I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I got dressed and arranged for my neighbor to listen for the girls, I thought about how everything had changed in the space of a single phone call. For 3 years, I'd been the one who needed help, who was struggling, who was doing everything wrong. Now my brother was asking me to teach him how to be the father I'd had to learn to become. The drive to Jake's house felt like traveling to a different world, one where I was the expert, the one with the answers, the one who had figured out what really mattered. Jake's house looked like a tornado had hit it. This was the same pristine space that had always intimidated me with its perfect cleanliness and designer furniture. Now there were dishes in the sink, toys scattered across the living room floor, and what appeared to be the contents of an entire laundry basket dumped on the couch. Jake opened the door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, and his eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. Thank God you're here, he said, running his hands through his hair. I have no idea what I'm doing. Rebecca came back this morning to get more clothes and to let the boys pack some things. She said they could stay here tonight, that I needed to prove I could handle them. But Marcus, I can't even figure out what to feed them for dinner. I looked around. the chaos and felt something I'd never experienced before, complete confidence in my ability to handle the situation. This wasn't intimidating, it was familiar. This was just life with children. Where are David and Michael now? I asked. Upstairs? They've been up there since Rebecca left. David's been trying to take care of Michael, but they're both scared and confused. Every time I try to talk to them, they just stare at me like I'm a stranger. I walked to the bottom of the staircase and called up gently, David, Michael, it's Uncle Marcus. I'm here to help your dad figure out some things. Want to come down and help us? There was a long pause, then the sound of whispering. Finally, David appeared at the top of the stairs, holding Michael's hand. Uncle Marcus. David's voice was small and uncertain. Are you going to stay with us? For tonight? Yes, and we're going to figure this out together, okay? They came down slowly, Michael clinging to his older brother. Both boys looked lost and overwhelmed, but I could see the relief in their eyes at having a familiar adult who seemed calm and in control. First things first, I said, turning to Jake. When did they last eat? I don't know. Rebecca gave them breakfast, I think. I've been so focused on trying to understand what went wrong that I forgot about lunch. It was almost 4 p.m. These kids had been dealing with their parents' crisis while running on empty stomachs for hours. Okay, boys, let's see what we can find for a snack, I said, heading toward the kitchen. David, can you show me where your dad keeps the bread? Michael, want to help me find the peanut butter? As we worked together to make simple sandwiches, I watched Jake observe us with fascination. He seemed amazed by how naturally the boys responded to being given small tasks, how they perked up when they felt useful rather than just managed. How do you do that? He asked quietly while the boys ate their sandwiches at the kitchen table. What? Make them feel safe. Make them want to help instead of just hiding upstairs. I thought about how to explain something that had become instinctive to me. Kids don't need you to have all the answers, Jake. They need you to be present and calm, and to include them in solving problems. Look at David. He's been taking care of Michael because he needed to feel useful. Give him ways to help you instead of trying to do everything yourself. Over the next few hours, I watched Jake try to implement what I was showing him. When Michael spilled juice, Jake's first instinct was to rush over and clean it up while telling Michael to be more careful. But he caught himself, took a breath, and instead got Michael a paper towel and helped him clean it up himself. Accidents happen, Jake said, and I could tell he was working to keep his voice calm. Good job cleaning it up. The transformation in Michael's face was immediate. Instead of looking ashamed and worried, he beamed with pride at having handled the situation himself. By bedtime, both boys were more relaxed, more talkative. David had shown Jake where they kept their pajamas and toothbrushes. Michael had insisted on picking out his own clothes for the next day. Jake had listened to their preferences about bedtime stories and had actually read to them instead of just saying goodnight from the doorway after the boys were asleep. Jake and I sat in his living room, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a house where children actually lived. I had no idea, he said quietly. I thought being a good father meant providing for them, making sure they had advantages, teaching them to be successful. I never realized that none of that matters if they don't feel like I actually know who they are. You're learning, I said. That's all any of us can do. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, genuine respect mixed with something that might have been awe. Marcus, I owe you an apology. All these years, I thought you were struggling because you didn't know what you were doing. I see now that you were actually figuring out what really mattered. For the first time in our relationship, I was the teacher and he was the student. It should have felt triumphant, but instead it just felt like the beginning of something new. A brotherhood built on mutual respect rather than judgment. The next evening, I brought The Brave Little Knights, a story about two brothers who learn that true courage comes from helping each other rather than trying to be the strongest alone. It was one of Emma and Lily's favorites, and I thought it might resonate with David and Michael's situation. Jake had managed to get through the day at work, but when I arrived, he looked frazzled again. The boys were cranky. Dinner was a disaster of burned chicken and soggy vegetables, and everyone seemed on edge. I don't understand, Jake said as we stood in the kitchen, surveying the mess. I followed the recipe exactly. I timed everything. How did you make it look so easy last night? Because last night wasn't about the food, I said, watching David push peas around his plate while Michael whined about being hungry. It was about the connection. Kids can sense when you're stressed, and they'll mirror that energy back to you. I could see Jake trying to process this information. For him, success had always been about execution, following the plan, meeting the objectives, delivering results. The idea that emotional state mattered more than technical competence was foreign to him. Let me show you something, I said, then turned to the boys. David, Michael, want to help Uncle Marcus make some emergency mac and cheese? Both boys perked up immediately. I pulled out a box of mac and cheese from Jake's pantry and set up an assembly line. David was in charge of measuring the milk. Michael got to add the cheese powder, and Jake was responsible for stirring. The secret ingredient, I told them conspiratorially, is to sing while you cook. It makes the food taste better. Michael giggled. That's not real. Try it and see, I challenged. Soon we were all humming different songs while preparing the simplest possible dinner. David chose a song from school. Michael contributed what might have been the theme from a cartoon. And Jake, looking bewildered but game, hummed something that sounded like classical music. The mac and cheese was nothing special, but the boys ate it happily, chattering about their day and asking Jake questions about his work. I watched Jake discover that his children were actually interesting people with thoughts and opinions and funny observations about the world. After dinner, we settled into the living room for story time. I opened The Brave Little Knights and began reading about Sir David the Wise and Sir Michael the Brave, two brothers who had to work together to save their kingdom. "Hey, those are our names," Michael exclaimed, bouncing on the couch. "Really?" I said with exaggerated surprise. "What a coincidence." As I read, I watched Jake watching his sons. David was completely absorbed in the story, asking questions about the knights' strategies and pointing out details in the illustrations. Michael was acting out the sword fights, making whooshing sounds and dramatic gestures. Jake's face showed wonder as if he was seeing his children clearly for the first time. When the story ended with the brothers realizing they were stronger together than apart, David looked up at his father. "Daddy, are you and Uncle Marcus like the knights? Because you help each other." Jake's eyes met mine across the room, and I saw understanding dawn in his expression. "You know what, David? I think we are. Uncle Marcus is teaching me how to be a better knight." "Can we read it again tomorrow?" Michael asked, snuggling against Jake's side. "If you want to," Jake said, his voice soft with amazement. "We can read whatever stories you like." After the boys were in bed, Jake and I talked about what had happened. "I never realized they paid attention to the stories like that," he said. "I always thought bedtime reading was just something you had to get through before they could sleep." "Everything is a lesson when you're a kid," I explained. "They're not just listening to the plot, they're learning about relationships, about how problems get solved, about what matters to the adults in their lives. When you read to them, you're not just killing time before bed. You're showing them that their thoughts and questions matter to you." Jake shook his head slowly. "I've been so focused on preparing them for success that I never stopped to enjoy who they are right now." "David is incredibly thoughtful. Did you hear the questions he was asking about the story? And Michael has this amazing imagination. I never took the time to notice these things before. They're great kids, Jake. They just needed their dad to slow down enough to see them." That night, as I drove home, I realized something had shifted between us. For the first time in our lives, Jake was looking to me as someone who had mastered something important. But more than that, he was discovering that the children he thought he knew were actually strangers he was excited to meet. The foundation was being laid for a relationship, built on presence rather than performance, and Jake was finally ready to learn what I'd been teaching myself for the past 3 years. That being a good father isn't about having all the answers, it's about being willing to figure things out together. The marriage counseling business card fell out of Jake's wallet when he was looking for his credit card to pay for pizza. It was crumpled and worn, as if it had been handled many times but never acted upon. Dr. Sarah Martinez, licensed marriage and family therapist. The appointment time written in Rebecca's handwriting had been crossed out. "She wanted us to go," Jake said quietly, picking up the card and staring at it. 6 months ago, she said we needed help communicating, that we were like strangers living in the same house. I told her we didn't need a stranger to fix our problems, that we were adults who could work things out ourselves. We were sitting in his living room, after putting the boys to bed. It was my 3rd night helping him navigate single parenthood, and the conversations were getting deeper, more honest. "I didn't understand what she meant about communication," he continued. "I thought we communicated fine. We discussed schedules, coordinated the boys' activities, made decisions about finances and schools. What more was there to talk about?" I thought about my own marriage, how Sarah and I had started as partners, but gradually became roommates, then strangers. "When was the last time you and Rebecca talked about something that wasn't logistics?" I asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I don't remember," he finally admitted. "Maybe years. Our conversations were always about what needed to be done, what problems needed to be solved, what the boys needed. We stopped talking about dreams or feelings or even just stupid, random thoughts." "What about when you were dating? What did you talk about then?" "Everything," he said with a sad smile. "Rebecca was studying art history when we met. She had all these passionate opinions about painters I'd never heard of. She wanted to travel, to see the great museums of Europe. She was funny and spontaneous, and full of ideas about the life she wanted to build. What happened to that person?" "I happened," Jake said flatly. "I turned her into the perfect corporate wife. I needed someone who could manage the social aspects of my career, who could create the right image, who could run our household efficiently while I focused on work. I thought I was giving her security and status, but I was actually asking her to disappear." The honesty in his voice was painful to hear. This wasn't just about parenting or divorce. It was about a man realizing he'd systematically destroyed the very qualities that had made him fall in love with his wife. "She used to paint," he continued. "Did you know that? She was really talented. But after David was born, there was no time for hobbies. I told her she could always get back to it later, when things were less hectic. Except things never got less hectic, because I kept adding more responsibilities to her plate. I thought about Emma's art supplies spread across our kitchen table, about the creative chaos that filled our house. Why didn't you want her to have time for art? I thought it was impractical. We had real responsibilities, kids, mortgage, social obligations. Art seemed selfish when there were so many important things that needed attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was my brother, who had spent years criticizing my creative choices, realizing that he'd crushed the creativity in his own wife. Jake, I said carefully, do you think you even knew Rebecca anymore? Not the person she became to please you, but who she really was. He was quiet for so long, I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. No, I don't think I did, and I don't think she knew me either. I was so busy being successful, being the provider, being what I thought a husband and father should be, that I forgot to be myself. We were both playing roles instead of being real people. Is that what you want for David and Michael? To grow up thinking that love means performing instead of connecting? The question hit him hard. I could see him imagining his sons as adults, struggling in their own relationships, because they'd learned that love was about meeting expectations rather than being known and accepted. God, no, he said. But Marcus, I don't know how to be different. I've been performing for so long, I'm not sure who I really am anymore. How do I teach them authenticity when I don't even know what that looks like? You start by being honest. About not knowing, I said. You let them see you figuring things out. You show them that it's okay to be confused or scared or imperfect. You let them know the real you, even when that person isn't impressive or successful or in control. That terrifies me, he admitted. What if the real me isn't good enough? What if, without all the performance and achievement, there's nothing worth loving? The vulnerability in his voice broke my heart. My successful, confident brother was revealing the fear that had driven him his entire life. The fear that he was only valuable for what he could accomplish, not for who he was. Jake, I said, your boys don't love you because you have a corner office or a house in Westchester. They love you because you're their dad. But they need to know who their dad actually is, not just the role he plays. That night, as Jake walked me to the door, he stopped and turned to me with tears in his eyes. I've spent so many years judging your choices, thinking you were settling for less than you could achieve. But you were actually choosing what mattered. Most you chose to be real with your daughters, to let them know who you are. I chose success over authenticity, and I lost everything that really mattered. For the first time in our relationship, I saw my brother not as the golden child or the critic, but as a man who was finally ready to discover who he could become when he stopped trying to be perfect. The weekly schedule template I'd created for Jake looked overwhelming when printed out, a detailed grid covering every aspect of managing a household with children. Morning routines, meal planning, homework schedules, bedtime protocols, weekend activities, emergency contacts, and backup plans for when everything went wrong. This is what you do every week? Jake asked, staring at the document in disbelief. More or less. Though most of it becomes automatic after a while. The schedule isn't about being rigid, it's about creating enough structure that you have mental space for the important stuff. Rebecca had agreed to let the boys stay with Jake for a full week while she visited her parents in Florida. It was a test, she'd said, proof that Jake could handle the reality of single parenting before they made any permanent decisions about custody. I'd offered to help him prepare, but Jake was determined to do it himself. I need to know if I can actually handle this, he said. If I'm going to fight for my boys, I have to prove to myself that I can be the father they deserve. The first morning was a disaster. Jake overslept because he'd forgotten to set his alarm, which meant everything else fell apart like dominoes. No time for breakfast, frantic search for David's homework folder, Michael's meltdown over not having his favorite shirt clean, both boys arriving at school hungry and stressed. I got the panicked text at 9:15 a.m. How do you make this look easy? By Wednesday, Jake was starting to understand the intricate dance of single parenthood. He'd learned to lay out clothes the night before, to pack lunches while the boys ate breakfast, to build extra time into every transition. But he was exhausted in a way he'd never experienced before. I had no idea how many decisions you have to make in a single day, he told me during our nightly check-in call. What to pack for lunch, whether Michael needs a jacket, if David's cough is bad enough to keep him home, how much TV is too much, whether to push bedtime back because they're having fun, or stick to the schedule because routine is important. My brain is constantly processing 100 different variables, and that's just the logistics. I reminded him. Wait until you add in emotional management, conflict resolution, and trying to figure out why one of them is suddenly sad for no apparent reason. Thursday brought the grocery shopping expedition that nearly broke him. Michael had a tantrum in the cereal aisle because they were out of his preferred brand. David kept wandering off to look at toys. Jake forgot half the items on his list because he was too busy trying to manage behavior and navigate the store efficiently. The other parents were staring at me, he said that night, sounding defeated. This mom with 3 kids who were all perfectly behaved kept giving me these looks like I was failing at basic human functions. I wanted to explain that I'm usually competent at things, that I run a department with 40 employees, that I'm not normally the guy who can't handle grocery shopping with 2 children. Jake, I said gently, that perfectly behaved mom. She's been doing this for years. She's made every mistake you're making now, probably multiple times. The difference is, she's past the learning curve, and you're still climbing it. Friday night, after the boys were finally asleep, Jake called me, sounding emotionally drained but oddly proud. I did it, he said. I got them through a whole week. They're fed, they're clean, they got to school on time most days, their homework is done, and they seem relatively happy. It wasn't perfect, but we survived. How do you feel? Completely exhausted, also amazed. Marcus, how did you do this while dealing with your own grief and fear? At least I know this situation is temporary. You were facing the possibility of doing this forever, with no backup plan, while trying to heal from your marriage ending. There was a long pause before he continued. I owe you an apology, that's 3 years overdue. When Sarah left, I thought you were overwhelmed because you weren't organized enough, disciplined enough, structured enough. I thought if you just applied some basic management principles, single parenting would be straightforward. And now, I understand that what you've been doing is incredibly difficult, and you've been doing it with grace and creativity and love. You didn't just survive Sarah leaving, you built something beautiful with your daughters. You turned a crisis into an opportunity to become an amazing father. You're going to be an amazing father too. Jake, you're already becoming one. I hope so, because I finally understand what's at stake here. It's not about winning a custody battle or proving I'm competent. It's about whether David and Michael get to have a real relationship with their dad, and whether I get to know the incredible people they're becoming. That weekend I watched Jake with his boys and saw a transformation that went beyond just learning. Practical skills. He was more patient, more present, more willing to let things be imperfect if it meant connecting with his children. He'd stopped trying to manage them and started trying to understand them. The schedule template was still on his refrigerator, but it was covered with the boys' artwork now, and Jake had added notes in the margins, not about efficiency, but about the small moments that had made each day special. David's joke about dinosaurs, Michael's hug after a skinned knee, the way they both ran to him when he picked them up from school. He was learning what I'd discovered 3 years earlier, that being a good parent isn't about having everything under control. It's about showing up with love, even when you have no idea what you're doing. The old family photo sat on Jake's coffee table, faded and creased, showing 2 boys on a beach vacation from 25 years ago. Jake, maybe 11, stands tall and serious, while 80-year-old me grins at the camera with sand in my hair and ice cream on my shirt. Even then, our different approaches to the world were evident. Do you remember this trip? Jake asked, picking up the photo. It was Sunday evening, the boys were asleep, and we'd been talking about practical parenting strategies when the conversation gradually shifted to something deeper. Barely I remember the ice cream though. I smiled at my younger self's sticky face. You were so annoyed with me that whole vacation because I kept getting dirty and losing things. I was terrified, Jake said quietly. Of what? Of not being good enough. Of disappointing mom and dad. Of not living up to what everyone expected. From the older brother. He traced his finger along the edge of the photo. You were so naturally happy, so comfortable just being yourself. I envied that, but I also resented it because it seemed irresponsible to me. This was a side of Jake I'd never seen. Vulnerable, reflective, willing to examine the patterns that had shaped our relationship. I always felt like I had to be perfect, he continued. The responsible one, the achiever, the one who had everything. Figured out if I succeeded, I got approval. If I failed or showed weakness, I got lectures about potential and disappointment. I remember those lectures, I said. I got plenty of them too, but you handled them differently. You'd listen, nod, and then go back to being exactly who you were. I internalized every criticism, every expectation, every suggestion for improvement. By high school, I wasn't sure where the expectations ended, and I began. I thought about our childhood, seeing it now through Jake's eyes instead of my own. I'd always assumed he enjoyed being the golden child, that the praise and attention came easily to him. I'd never considered that it might have felt like pressure rather than privilege. Do you remember when I didn't make varsity soccer junior year? Jake asked. You were devastated. I locked myself in my room for 3 days. Not because I cared that much about soccer, but because I'd failed at something I was supposed to be good at. Dad kept saying it was a learning experience, that it would make me stronger, but all I heard was that I wasn't meeting expectations. What about me? What did I represent to you back then? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Freedom, I guess. You could mess up and people would just shrug and say that's Marcus. You could be average at things and still be loved. You could choose art over business, teaching over corporate success, creativity over security, and nobody questioned whether you were a good person. But they did question whether I was a successful person. Yeah, but that's different. I was measuring my worth by external achievements because I thought that's what love was based on. You seem to understand that you were valuable just for being you. The irony was painful. I'd spent years feeling inadequate compared to Jake, while he'd spent years feeling trapped by the very success I envied. The thing is, I said carefully, I didn't feel valuable at all. I felt like the family disappointment. Every family gathering, every conversation about the future, every well-meaning question about my plans, it all reinforced that I was the brother who wasn't living up to his potential. Really, when you got married, I felt like I'd failed at being an adult. When you bought the house in Westchester, I felt like I'd failed at providing security. When your boys were born, I felt like I'd failed at creating the perfect family. Your success was a constant reminder of my limitations. Jake shook his head slowly. So we were both miserable, just for different reasons. I guess so. You felt trapped by expectations, I felt crushed by not meeting them, and now, I thought, about the journey that had brought us to this moment, Sarah leaving, the girls and I building our life together, Jake's marriage falling apart, this new understanding between us. Now I think we were both wrong about what success looks like. You achieved everything you thought you were supposed to want, but you lost connection with the people who mattered most. I thought I was failing because I wasn't achieving enough, but I was actually building something more valuable than any external measure of success. Your relationship with Emma and Lily, yeah, and ironically, it took losing Sarah for me to discover that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. It took your marriage ending for you to discover what you actually wanted your life to be about. Jake picked up the photo again, studying our younger selves. I wish I could go back and tell that 11-year-old boy that it was okay not to have everything figured out. That making mistakes didn't make him a failure. That being loved wasn't something he had to earn. What would you tell the in the picture? I'd tell him he was enough exactly as he was. That his creativity and joy and willingness to be imperfect were gifts, not flaws. That there was more than one way to be successful, and his way was just as valid as anyone else's. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing decades of misunderstanding and missed connection. Marcus, Jake said finally, I'm sorry, for all the years of treating you like you needed to be fixed, for dismissing your choices, for making you feel like you weren't good enough. You were actually the one who understood what mattered most, and I was too blind to see it. I'm sorry too, I said, for resenting your success instead of being proud of you, for assuming your life was easy just because it looked perfect from the outside, for not understanding the pressure you were under. Do you think we can be different now, as brothers? I think we already are, I said, looking at the man who had called me for help instead of judgment, who had let me teach him instead of trying to fix me. For the first time in our lives, we're seeing each other clearly. The old family photo showed two boys who didn't yet understand how much they had to learn from each other. But the men we'd become were finally ready to be the brothers we'd always had the potential to be. The divorce papers sat on Jake's kitchen table like a declaration of war. Rebecca had returned from Florida with a lawyer, a custody proposal, and a list of demands that made it clear she saw their marriage as a business transaction that needed to be dissolved efficiently. She wants the house, full custody with supervised visitation for me, and half my retirement accounts, Jake said, his voice hollow as he read through the documents. She's claiming I'm an unfit parent because I work too much and have no experience with primary child care responsibilities. I watched him process the reality that the woman he'd built a life with was now actively working to dismantle that life in the most painful way possible. What does your lawyer say? That she has a strong case. I've never been the primary caregiver. She's documented instances of me missing school events, working late when the boys were sick, prioritizing business trips over family obligations. On paper, she looks like the stable parent, and I look like the absent father who suddenly wants involvement when it's convenient. The boys were at school, unaware that their future was being negotiated by lawyers and judges who would decide where they lived and how often they saw their father. Rebecca arrived at 3 p.m. sharp, impeccably dressed and carrying a legal pad covered with notes. She looked like she was preparing for a board meeting rather than discussing the dissolution of her family. Jake, she said coolly, settling into the living room chair furthest from where he sat, I assume you've reviewed the proposal. I have, and I'm not signing it. Rebecca's perfectly composed expression flickered with surprise. What do you mean? I'm not agreeing to supervised visitation with my own children. I'm not giving up the house they've lived in their entire lives. And I'm not accepting that I'm an unfit parent just because I made mistakes in our marriage. Jake, be realistic. You barely know these children. You can't tell me their teachers' names, their favorite foods, what frightens them, what makes them laugh. You've never managed their schedules or handled their emotional needs. What makes you think you can suddenly become a primary caregiver? 3 weeks ago, those words would have devastated him because they were true. But Jake had spent the last week learning his children's routines, preferences, and personalities. He'd discovered that David was afraid of thunderstorms but loved science, documentaries, that Michael had a sophisticated sense of humor but needed extra reassurance when trying new things. You're right, Jake said calmly. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't have told you any of those things, but I can now. David's teacher is Mrs. Rodriguez, and she says he's struggling with math but excels at creative writing. Michael's favorite food is mac and cheese, but only if he gets to add the cheese powder himself. David is afraid of storms but finds them fascinating if you explain the science. Michael laughs at physical comedy but gets scared by loud noises. Rebecca's composure cracked. slightly. Knowing a few details doesn't make you a competent parent, Jake. No, but being willing to learn does. Being present does. Choosing my children over my ego does. What's that supposed to mean? Jake stood up and walked to the mantel, where he'd placed the boys' artwork from the past week, crayon drawings of their family, including pictures of Daddy helping with homework and Daddy reading stories. It means I finally understand what you were trying to tell me for years. I was so focused on providing for this family that I forgot to be part of it. I thought success meant giving you and the boys everything you needed, but what you actually needed was my presence, my attention, my emotional investment. And you think you can just change overnight? No. I think I've been changing for the past 3 weeks, and I'm committed to continuing that change. Rebecca, I don't want to fight you. I want to figure out how we can both be good parents to our children, even if we can't be married to each other. The supervised visitation is for their protection. Jake, they need stability, routine, consistency. You've proven that work will always come first for you. I've quit my job. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Rebecca stared at him in shock. What? I gave notice on Friday. I'm starting a consulting practice that I can run from home. Flexible schedule, local clients only, no travel. The boys' needs come first now. You're lying. You would never give up that position. You live for that job. I thought I did. But I've learned the difference between living for work and working to live. I want to be the father David and Michael deserve, and I can't do that from a corner office in Manhattan. Rebecca's carefully constructed composure finally cracked completely. You can't just reinvent yourself because your marriage failed, Jake. You can't suddenly become a different person because it's convenient. You're right, Jake said quietly. I can't become a different person, but I can become the person I was always capable of being, the person I should have been all along. For the first time since she'd walked into the house, Rebecca looked uncertain. The man she was facing wasn't the emotionally distant husband she'd grown tired of fighting. This was someone who had made fundamental changes in his priorities and seemed genuinely committed to being present for his children. What are you proposing? She asked finally. Joint custody. The boys stay in the house, and we alternate weeks. You get the fresh start you want. I get the chance to be a real father. And David and Michael get both their parents actively involved in their lives. And if you can't handle it, if you revert to your old patterns, then we revisit the arrangement. But Rebecca, I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove that I can be the partner in parenting that I never was in marriage. She was quiet for a long time, studying his face as if trying to determine whether this transformation was real or just another performance. I'll think about it, she said finally. But Jake, if you're doing this to try to win me back, I'm not, he said firmly. Our marriage is over, and I accept that. I take full responsibility for the ways I failed as a husband, but I'm not willing to accept that I'm destined to fail as a father. Those boys deserve better than weekend visits and holiday phone calls. After Rebecca left, Jake sat on the couch, looking emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. How do you feel? I asked, terrified, he admitted, but also more certain than I've been about anything in years. For the first time, I'm fighting for something that really matters, and I'm fighting as the person I actually am instead of the person I thought I was supposed to be. The divorce papers were still on the table, but they no longer looked like a declaration of war. They looked like the first step toward a new kind of family, one built on authenticity rather than appearances, presence rather than performance. The co-parenting agreement that Jake and Rebecca finally signed was a testament to compromise and the recognition that their children's well-being mattered more than winning. Joint custody, shared decisions about education and healthcare, and a schedule that prioritized stability for David and Michael while giving both parents meaningful time with their sons. But having an agreement on paper was different from making it work in practice. Jake still had so much to learn about emotional intelligence, patience, and the kind of presence that children need from their parents. The first real test came on a rainy Tuesday when Michael had a complete meltdown over a broken toy. Not just crying, but the kind of full-body, inconsolable tantrum that can leave even experienced parents feeling helpless. Jake's first instinct was to fix the problem, order a replacement toy online, offer alternatives, explain why crying wouldn't solve anything. Jake, I said gently, watching him frantically search Amazon on his phone while Michael wailed on the living room floor. Stop trying to fix it and start trying to understand it, but he's miserable. The toy can't be repaired, but I can have a new one here by tomorrow. It's not about the toy. Jake looked at me with confusion, then back at Michael, who was now hiccuping through his tears and clinging to the broken pieces. Then what is it about? Think about it. Michael's 4 years old, his parents are divorced. He's living in 2 different houses. His whole world has been turned upside down. This toy breaking isn't just a toy breaking, it's one more thing in his life that's broken and can't be fixed the way it used to be. Understanding dawned on Jake's face. He put down his phone, sat on the floor next to Michael, and simply waited. When the crying slowed to sniffles, Jake spoke quietly. That was a really special toy, wasn't it? Michael nodded, clutching the broken pieces. And it's scary when something you love gets broken. Another nod. this one accompanied by fresh tears. You know what? Sometimes I feel scared too when things break or change. It's okay to be sad about it. Jake didn't try to minimize Michael's feelings or rush him through them. He just sat with his son in the sadness, acknowledging that loss, even small losses, deserved to be grieved. Can I give you a hug while you feel sad? Jake asked. Michael crawled into his father's lap, and they sat together until the storm passed. Later, they buried the broken toy in the backyard with a small ceremony that honored what it had meant to Michael. Only then did Jake mention that they could look for a new toy together, when Michael felt ready. With David, the lessons were different. 7-year-old David had become hyper-vigilant about his parents' emotions, constantly monitoring Jake's mood and trying to be the good child who didn't cause any additional stress. I watched Jake gradually learn to recognize when David was suppressing his own needs to take care of the adults around him. During homework time, when David struggled with a math problem but insisted he was fine, Jake learned to dig deeper. David, you seem frustrated. That's totally normal with math. It can be really tricky. I'm not frustrated, Daddy. I can figure it out. You know what? I get frustrated with work problems sometimes too. It doesn't mean I'm not smart. It just means the problem is challenging. Want to tell me what's confusing about this one? Jake was learning that being a good father meant teaching his children that all emotions were acceptable, that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness, and that they didn't need to protect him from their authentic feelings. The breakthrough came during what started as a disaster. Jake had planned a special Saturday outing to the Science Museum, complete with advanced tickets and a carefully researched itinerary. But David woke up with a headache. Michael was cranky from a growth spurt, and by 10 a.m. it was clear that forcing the museum trip would make everyone miserable. The old Jake would have pushed through anyway, insisting that plans needed to be honored and commitments kept. But this Jake looked at his sons and made a different choice. You know what? Let's scrap the museum and have a pajama day instead. But you bought tickets? David said, his face pinched with worry about the wasted money. Tickets are just money, buddy, but if we go when you don't feel good, we won't have fun. And having fun together is the whole point. They spent the day building blanket forts, watching cartoons, and making pancakes for lunch. It was unproductive, unstructured, and absolutely perfect. By evening, both boys were relaxed and silly, telling jokes and asking for extra stories at bedtime. Daddy, David said as Jake tucked him in. This was better than the museum. Really? Why? Because you weren't worried about anything. You were just happy to be with us. That night, Jake called me with wonder in his voice. I finally understand what you mean about being present. It's not about having the perfect activities, or teaching them important lessons, or making sure they're constantly enriched. It's about being genuinely glad to be in their company. And how does that feel? Like I've been missing the point of fatherhood for 7 years, but also like I finally get to start over and do it right. The co-parenting agreement had given Jake the legal right to be an active father, but more importantly, he was earning the emotional right to be the dad his boys needed, not through grand gestures or perfect planning, but through the accumulation of small moments where he chose connection over control. Presence over performance. Rebecca noticed the change during transitions between houses. She started staying for a few minutes to chat about the boys' week, asking Jake's opinions about decisions, treating him like a partner in parenting rather than a weekend babysitter. They talk about you differently now, she told him one evening. They used to mention things you bought them or places you took them. Now they talk about conversations you had, games you played, how you helped them when they were upset. They're not just spending time with you anymore, they're connecting with you. Jake was becoming the father he'd always had the potential to be, and his sons were finally getting to know who their dad really was beneath the performance and pressure. The foundation was being laid for relationships that would last long beyond the challenges of divorce and co-parenting, relationships built on authentic love rather than obligation. The Thanksgiving menu hanging on Jake's refrigerator represented something unprecedented in our family history. A holiday planned by two brothers working as equal partners rather than one brother receiving help from the other. Turkey and stuffing at Jake's house, sides and desserts at mine. 4 cousins running between both homes, and a celebration that felt authentic for the first time in years. Are you sure about hosting here? Jake asked for the 3rd time as we reviewed the logistics. Your house is more set up for family gatherings. Jake, you have a dining room that actually fits everyone. Plus, the boys should get to host in their own home. This is about them feeling proud of what you've built together. The transformation in Jake's house was remarkable. Where there had once been museum-like perfection, there was now the comfortable chaos of a home where children actually lived. Artwork covered the refrigerator, books were scattered on coffee tables, and there were actual toys in the living room, instead of just the designated playroom. Upstairs, Emma and Lily arrived early to help with preparations. And I watched in amazement, as all 4 children naturally fell into the kind of cousin relationship I'd always hoped they'd have. David, the natural organizer, assigned everyone tasks for setting up the kids' table. Michael appointed himself entertainment director, teaching the girls his latest joke repertoire. Emma shared her art supplies for making place cards, and Lily helped Michael practice his reading by going through the kid-friendly recipes we'd planned. But the real magic was watching Jake interact with my daughters. For years, he'd been polite but distant with Emma and Lily, treating them like pleasant but somewhat foreign creatures. Now he was on the floor helping them design place cards, asking about their school projects, and actually listening to their answers. "Uncle Jake," Emma said, as she carefully wrote everyone's name in her best cursive. "Daddy says you're learning how to be a different kind of dad now." "That's right. Your daddy has been teaching me a lot about what kids really need." "What did you learn?" Jake paused, considering how to explain complex emotional concepts to a 9. "I learned that being a good dad isn't about giving kids everything they want or making sure they never struggle. It's about paying attention to who they really are and helping them feel safe to be themselves." "Oh," Lily chimed in, "like how Daddy lets us be messy when we're creating art, but we still have to clean up after ourselves." "Exactly like that. Rules and boundaries because he loves you, but freedom to be yourselves within those boundaries." I felt a surge of pride listening to Jake articulate parenting philosophy that he was still learning but clearly understood. More than that, I felt the deep satisfaction of seeing my brother finally connect with my daughters as real people rather than just extensions of his occasionally problematic younger brother. When Rebecca arrived to drop off some of the boys' belongings, she stayed longer than planned, drawn into the warm chaos of preparation. She and Jake moved around each other carefully but without the sharp tension that had characterized their interactions for months. "This feels different," she said to me while Jake was outside with the kids, watching them play in the yard. "Different how?" "Like an actual family. Not a performance of what a family should look like, but the real thing. Messy and loud and imperfect, but genuine." That's what Jake's been learning. That real connection is messier than perfect presentation, but it's also more satisfying. I can see it in the boys. They're more relaxed with him, more willing to share their feelings. David doesn't monitor Jake's moods anymore, and Michael doesn't perform for his attention. When we all finally sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between adults and children. Serious topics and silly jokes, memories of past holidays, and plans for future adventures. Jake asked thoughtful questions about school and friends. The kids told stories that actually held the adults' attention. Nobody was performing the role of the perfect family. We were just being ourselves together. "I want to say something," Jake announced as we finished the main course. "This year, I'm thankful for second chances, for learning that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. For my boys who are teaching me every day what unconditional love actually looks like, and for my brother, who showed me that strength isn't about having all the answers, it's about being willing to figure things out with the people you love. I'm thankful for Uncle Jake learning how to be silly," Michael added seriously, making everyone laugh. "I'm thankful that our families can be together, even though things are different now," David said with the wisdom of a child who had learned that families can change shape without breaking completely. Emma raised her hand like she was in school. "I'm thankful that Uncle Jake likes us now." "I always liked you, Emma," Jake said gently. "No, but now you like us like you, like David and Michael, like we're real people, not just Marcus's kids." The observation was so astute and honest that it left Jake momentarily speechless. Finally he nodded. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see how amazing you are." "It's okay," Lily said pragmatically. "Grown-ups take longer to figure things out than kids do." As the evening wound down and families prepared to head home, I realized we'd created something none of us had expected when the year began. Reconstruction of the family we used to be, but something entirely new, a chosen family built on mutual respect, authentic connection, and the understanding that love looks different than it appears in magazines or holiday cards. "Thank you," Rebecca said as she gathered her things, "for helping Jake become the partner in parenting I always hoped he could be, for showing all of us what putting children first actually looks like." "Thank you for giving him the chance to prove he could change," I replied. Jake walked everyone out, hugging each person with the kind of presence that made it clear he was genuinely sorry to see them go. As I watched him say goodnight to my daughters, really seeing them, really connecting with them, I felt something I'd never experienced before with my brother. Complete pride in who he'd become. We'd both discovered that family isn't about meeting expectations or maintaining appearances. It's about showing up authentically for the people you love, even when you don't know what you're doing, especially when everything is falling apart. It's about choosing connection over perfection, presence over performance, love over fear. The holiday we'd planned as brothers had become a celebration of the family we'd all chosen to be. The thank you card arrived on a Tuesday, handwritten in Jake's careful script on expensive stationery that somehow felt less formal than heartfelt. "Marcus," it read, "I've been thinking about how to properly thank you for the past 6 months, and I keep coming back to the same truth. You didn't just teach me how to be a better father, you taught me how to be a better man. Your wisdom, patience, and grace during the hardest time of my life showed me what real strength looks like. I'm forever grateful to have you as my brother and my children's uncle. With love and respect, Jake." 6 months. Had it really been only 6 months since that middle-of-the-night phone call? The man who wrote this card seemed like a completely different person from the one who had called me in desperation, convinced that single parenthood was impossible. I was reading the card for the third time when my phone rang. Mom's number? Marcus? Honey, I just had lunch with Jake and the boys. I have to tell you, I barely recognize him, in the best possible way. What do you mean? He's present, really present. When David was telling a story about school, Jake put down his phone and actually listened. When Michael spilled his juice, Jake just cleaned it up without lecturing him about being careful. And the way he talks about you now, Marcus, he calls you his parenting mentor. The phrase made me smile. Jake's parenting mentor, 3 years ago. He would have found that concept absurd. He told me about the consulting business, Mom continued. Batty's working from home now. Batty's the one who picks up the boys from school and helps with homework. He seems genuinely happy. He is happy, happier than I've ever seen him. And Marcus, I owe you an apology too. I spent so many years worrying about your choices, thinking Jake had figured out the secret to a successful life while you were just getting by. I see now that you were building something much more valuable than external success. You were learning how to be truly present for the people who matter most. After we hung up, I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamic had shifted. At last week's Sunday dinner, Jake had asked my advice about handling David's anxiety about a school presentation. He'd deferred to my suggestions about managing sibling conflicts. He'd thanked me publicly for teaching him that consistency mattered more than perfection. The change in Jake's relationship with his sons was profound. David had blossomed into a confident, curious child who no longer felt responsible for managing adult emotions. Michael had maintained his natural exuberance while learning to trust that his father would be patient with his big feelings. Both boys ran to Jake when he picked them up from school, eager to share their days with someone they knew would really listen. But perhaps more importantly, Jake had learned to trust himself as a father. He no longer second-guessed every decision, or compared himself to some impossible standard of parental perfection. When challenges arose, and they still did regularly, he approached them with curiosity rather than panic, confident that he and his sons could figure things out together. The transformation was evident in small moments. Jake now knew that David needed extra time to process new information, so he'd explain changes in routine well in advance. He understood that Michael's energy needed creative outlets, so their house was always stocked with art supplies and building materials. He'd learned to read their moods, to recognize when they needed comfort versus when they needed space, to differentiate between attention-seeking behavior and genuine distress. More than that, Jake had learned to share himself with his children. He told them stories about his own childhood, admitted when he made mistakes, and apologized when he handled situations poorly. He discovered that vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness, and that children actually felt safer with parents who could acknowledge their own humanity. The professional world had taken notice too. Jake's consulting practice was thriving, partly because his new approach to relationships had transformed his business interactions as well. He listened more carefully to clients, asked better questions, and built solutions that addressed real needs rather than just surface problems. His reputation had shifted from brilliant but difficult to brilliant and collaborative. I'm a better consultant because I'm a better father, he told me over coffee one afternoon. Learning to understand what David and Michael actually need, instead of what I think they should need, has made me better at understanding what my clients actually need. Everything is connected. The ripple effects extended to his relationship with Rebecca as well. Their co-parenting had evolved into something respectful and functional, built on shared commitment to their children's well-being rather than resentment about their failed marriage. They attended school events together, consulted each other about important decisions, and had developed the kind of partnership they'd never achieved when they were married. Rebecca told me something interesting yesterday, Jake said during one of our regular check-ins. She said that watching me become a real father helped her heal some of her own anger about our marriage. She can see now that I wasn't deliberately choosing work over family. I was just lost, trapped in a pattern I didn't know how to break. How does that feel? Liberating? For the first time, I can look back at my marriage without feeling like a complete failure. I can see that we were both doing our best with the tools we had, even though our best wasn't good enough to save the relationship. But the most remarkable change was in Jake's relationship with himself. The man who had spent his entire life seeking external validation had learned to find worth in internal satisfaction. He measured success by his children's happiness, by his own sense of purpose, by the quality of his relationships rather than the size of his bank account or the prestige of his position. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, he admitted, for this contentment to feel unsustainable, for the old anxiety about achievement to come back. But it hasn't. I wake up excited to see what David and Michael will teach me today. I go to bed satisfied with how I spent my time. I never had that before. The transformation was complete, but it was also ongoing. Jake continued to learn, to grow, to discover new aspects of fatherhood and of himself. The difference was that he now approached challenges with confidence rather than fear, knowing that presence and love were more powerful than perfection and control. 6 months ago, Jake had been a man in crisis, convinced that he was failing at everything that mattered. Now he was a man who had discovered his true purpose, who had learned that success isn't about meeting other people's expectations, It's about becoming the person your children need you to be. The new family photo sits on both our mantles now. 6 people arranged not in perfect poses, but in genuine connection. Emma and Lily flanking me on one side, David and Michael surrounding Jake on the other. All 4 children reaching toward each other in the middle. We're laughing at something Michael said right before the photographer clicked the shutter, and the joy on every face is unmistakable. It's been 8 months since Jake's midnight phone call, and the life we've all built together feels both surprising and inevitable. This morning, like every Saturday, the cousins are having a sleepover at my house while Jake attends his co-parenting counseling session with Rebecca, not because they're having problems, but because they're committed to continuing to improve their partnership for David and Michael's sake. Uncle Marcus, David says, looking up from the breakfast table where all 4 kids are working on a collaborative art project, do you think our families are weird? Weird how? Like my friend Tommy's parents are married and live in the same house, but you and my dad are both single dads, and we all hang out together all the time. Tommy says that's not normal. I consider how to explain that normal is far less important than healthy and happy. What do you think, buddy? Does our family feel weird to you? David thinks for a moment, then shakes his head. No, it feels good. Like really good. I have 2 houses, but I also have one big family. And my dad is happy now, and you're happy, and we get to be together a lot. Then I think we're doing exactly what we should be doing. Emma looks up from her section of the art project. Plus, we get to have twice as many sleepovers, and twice as many people who love us, and twice as many people to help with homework. Lily adds pragmatically, and twice as many people to play with, Michael concludes. Apparently settling the matter, their easy acceptance of our unconventional family structure amazes me. To them, love isn't defined by traditional categories or legal structures. It's defined by presence, consistency, and genuine care. They understand instinctively what took Jake and me decades to learn, that families are created by choice and commitment, not just by biology or law. Jake arrives back from counseling with coffee and donuts, sliding easily into the morning chaos. He examines the art project with serious attention, asking thoughtful questions about color choices and design decisions. The children beam under his focused interest. How did counseling go? I ask while the kids work. Really well. We're talking about taking a family vacation together next summer, not as a couple, but as co-parents. The boys want to go to Disney World, and Rebecca and I think we can handle a week of coordinated parenting in the most overstimulating place on earth. It sounds terrifying and wonderful, pretty much, but also exactly the kind of thing I would have dismissed as impossible a year ago. Turns out a lot of things I thought were impossible were just things I hadn't learned how to do yet. The irony of his words strikes both of us simultaneously. Jake had called single fatherhood impossible, but what he'd really meant was that he couldn't imagine succeeding at something that required emotional intelligence rather than analytical skills, presence rather than performance. Speaking of things we thought were impossible, Jake continues, I have something to tell you. Rebecca and I have been talking, and we want to make some changes to the custody arrangement. My heart clenches with worry. What kind of changes? We want to try a different kind of shared custody. Instead of the boys going back and forth between houses every week, we're thinking about all of us living closer together, maybe finding houses on the same street or in the same neighborhood, so the boys can walk between homes, have friends over at either place, feel like they truly belong in both spaces. The idea is radical and practical at the same time. Instead of treating divorce as a division of assets and time, they're it as an expansion of support and love. What do the boys think? We haven't told them yet, but we've been subtly asking questions about what would make them feel most secure. David said he wishes he could have his friends over without having to explain which house they should come to. Michael said he wants his toys to be in both places so he doesn't have to pack every time he moves. And Rebecca is really on board with this. It was her idea, actually. She said watching me become a real father made her realize that the boys are lucky to have 2 parents who love them deeply. Instead of treating that as a complication to be managed, she wants to treat it as a strength to be maximized. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzes with a text from Rebecca. Thank you for giving my sons their father back. And thank you for showing all of us what healthy family dynamics actually look like. The message moves me more than I expected. For years, Rebecca and I had circled each other politely at family gatherings, each seeing the other as evidence of our respective family members' poor choices. Now she was acknowledging that the unconventional family we'd created was actually healthier than the traditional one that had fallen apart. You know what I realized? Jake says, watching the children work together on their art project with easy collaboration and minimal conflict. I spent so many years thinking that success meant having control over outcomes, perfect marriage, perfect children, perfect career, perfect life. But real success is about showing up authentically for whatever actually happens and figuring out how to make it work. Even when what happens is messy and unpredictable and nothing like what you planned. Especially then. Look at us. 6 months ago, we were barely brothers. Now we're partners in raising 4 amazing kids who are growing up knowing they're loved unconditionally by multiple adults who actually like spending time with them. Are you happy, Jake? He considers the question seriously, looking around at the comfortable chaos of my kitchen. At children who feel safe to be themselves, at a life that looks nothing like what he'd planned but feels exactly right. I'm more than happy, Marcus. I'm grateful. Grateful for the crisis that forced me to discover who I really am, underneath all the performance. Grateful for a brother who was patient enough to teach me what I should have known all along. Grateful for children who were generous enough to give me a second chance to be their father. And grateful for the chance to discover that impossible things are just things we haven't learned how to do yet. Exactly, he says, grinning at me. Though I have to admit, I'm hoping the next impossible thing I learn to do is a little less dramatic than completely rebuilding my life. Don't worry, I say, gesturing toward the 4 children who are now planning some elaborate adventure involving the backyard and several kitchen chairs. With 4 kids between us, I'm sure there will be plenty of impossible things to figure out. But we'll figure them out together. As I watch Jake help Michael secure a blanket for it while patiently explaining structural engineering principles, I'm struck by how profoundly we've all been transformed by learning that love is a choice we make every day, not a feeling that happens. To us, that strength is about showing up consistently, not about never needing help. That family is about who shows up for you, not just who shares your DNA. My brother called single fatherhood impossible until he needed my parenting advice. Now we're both discovering that the impossible becomes possible when you're willing to learn, grow, and show up authentically for the people who matter most. The art project is finished now. A colorful collaboration that will go on both our refrigerators. In it, 6 stick figures stand together, under a rainbow, holding hands, in a chain that connects both houses, both families, and all the love we've chosen to share. Perfect? No. Impossible. Not anymore.